This is a CBS News special report, The Pope's Visit to America. I'm Scott Pelley reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York. Good afternoon. Pope Francis has just arrived in the United States for his first visit here. This is a live picture from Joint Base Andrews in Maryland, outside Washington, what we used to know as Andrews Air Force Base. The Pope has just landed, flying in from Cuba. Waiting to greet him is President Obama, and it is very rare for an American president to welcome a foreign leader at the airport. In fact, we don't believe that President Obama has ever done it before. Mr. Obama is very grateful to Francis, of course, for his role in the restoration of diplomatic ties between the United States and Cuba. The Pope traveled to the U.S. aboard this Alitalia Airbus A330, which is unofficially called Shepherd 1. As you can see there, the airplane is rolling up with the American flag and the white and yellow flag of the Vatican City-State flying from the cockpit there. Alan Pizzi of CBS News is on the airplane as we speak, where the Pope held a news conference with reporters while flying to the United States. Alan, what did he have to say?
Good afternoon, Scott. Well, he spoke to us for 26 minutes, answered 7 questions. The first one is about the embargo. He said he won't be mentioning it in Congress, but he said, quote, the problem of the embargo is part of negotiations. He said that's public knowledge. Both President Obama and Raul Castro have noted it. The Pope said, quote, my desire is that they end up with a good result, that they reach an accord which satisfies both sides. He said that, in fact, was part of the Church's social doctrine. That's what they want. The Church is, finally and by principle against embargoes. He was then asked about his frequent harsh criticisms of capitalism. He said that what he said does not make him a leftist or a lefty. He said there's been a misinterpretation of the things he said. Everything he has said or written, he said, is in keeping with the social doctrine of the Church. He was also questioned about why he didn't meet any dissidents. That was a big issue because the dissidents obviously represent something that the Cuban government does not want the Pope to hear or anybody else to see. They've jailed several. One person was actually hauled away from the Pope. But Pope Francis said he met with people. He didn't know if they were dissidents or not because they were not introduced or identified. And he said that he had not held any one-on-ones because he turned down all requests for private meetings, even with the Argentinian president who was there. So he wasn't snubbing anyone. He simply wasn't giving those kinds of interviews. He was asked about entering the U.S. via Cuba, and he said he had wanted to enter the U.S. from Mexico like an immigrant, but if he went to Mexico and didn't visit the Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe, he would, the Virgin of Guadalupe, he said that would be a big insult to Mexicans, and it was logistically very difficult. So after the accord between Havana and Washington, he thought, it would be a good idea to come from Cuba, and that's what we've just done. He was asked also about a headline about questioning whether or not the Pope was Catholic. He laughed at that and said, I'll recite the creed if you want me to. He didn't seem to be particularly concerned that anybody might think that, in fact, the Pope was not Catholic. In general, he looked pretty good. He was sprightly. He rubbed his eyes a couple times, but he was very jovial. He warned us all that we were in for a tough three cities worth of work. And he was asked to give a reply in English. He did his press conference in Spanish and Italian, and when we asked him to reply in English, he laughed and said, it's not my forte. But we do understand that he will be addressing Congress, at least in English, Scott.
Our Rome correspondent, Alan Pizzi, who is inside that airplane right now, having just attended the news conference of Pope Francis as the Pope flew from Cuba to the United States. And when the Pope mentions the embargo that he would like to see lifted, he of course is referring to the U.S. trade embargo against Cuba. The United States and Cuba have reopened diplomatic relations, but only the Congress of the United States can lift the embargo, and that hasn't happened yet. We are waiting for the door of the aircraft to open, and this will be Pope Francis's very first visit to the United States, his first visit in his life, the first Pope from the Americas visiting the United States for the very first time. As we're waiting for that, let's skip ahead to our Chip Reed, who is standing outside where the Pope will be staying in Washington overnight. Chip, what are we expecting from the Pope's visit?
Well, Scott, he will be staying in what's known as the Apostolic Nunciature, which is over my right shoulder, but the much more interesting view is over my left shoulder. The kids are still flowing in. 200 students from 10 different local Catholic schools will be here to greet him. I don't know if it's a surprise or not, but he certainly does love children, and this would be a good way to give him a good up feeling when he arrives here. What we're expecting from him is a lot of different things, but one thing is that he wants to help Catholic leaders in this country reinvigorate the Catholic Church, and part of that is by showing a welcoming face. It's also by talking about issues that he thinks are important, not only here but around the world. For example, immigration. He believes people should be welcomed with open arms, not just here, but in that chaotic situation in Europe and the Middle East. Also, poverty is an issue he's going to talk about in his speeches here, and he's going to talk about the environment and the importance of doing something about climate change, and his basic argument is that you need to talk about those issues here, but you also can't do anything about those issues in the rest of the world unless the United States is involved. But of course, he is also going to talk about traditional issues such as the sanctity of life and the traditional Catholic model of family. So he will be, to some degree, keeping people from all political persuasions happy here, while also making some of them unhappy with some of the things he says. I think number one is to try to reinvigorate the Catholic Church in the United States of America, which has seen some serious drop in numbers in recent years, Scott.
Chip Reed, thank you very much, Chip. The United States of America literally rolling out the red carpet for the Pope. The honor guard, as you see, now taking their place. And to the right of the screen, the flag of the United States and the flag of the Vatican City-State. Joining us right here in New York is our good friend, Monsignor Anthony Figueiredo, who is the spiritual director of the Pontifical North American College in Rome and our Vatican expert. Monsignor Figueiredo met and worked with three Holy Fathers, Pope Francis, Pope Benedict XVI, and St. John Paul II. He's worked 15 years in the Vatican City-State. Monsignor Figueiredo, what are you expecting the Pope to discuss as we see the door open to the aircraft?
I think this is a Pope who has been touched by his own personal history, Scott. So remember, this is a man who was a bouncer at a nightclub, who as a janitor cleaned floors, came from a family of immigrants who came from Italy to Argentina. That's going to that's going to affect everything he's going to be talking about. Four themes, I'd say. Friendship. He's a man who wants to build bridges, not build walls. He wants the walls to come down. Secondly, poverty. He truly believes that God is closest to those who suffer, and it's tangible. You know, when I'm in Rome, they're the ones he goes to. He's going to be talking a lot about mercy. That is his theme. He wants a church that has open doors. He doesn't want a church that teaches raw doctrine. He wants a church that says, this teaching, good news, is accessible to you. And finally, hope and joy. He wants everyone, Catholics, Muslims, those who are far away from the church, to know that they are welcome. They are welcome. And he is the first to give that testimony in his own personal life.
Father, thank you very much. As we watch the first family walk out, the president with his daughters, Sasha and Malia, and of course, the First Lady as well. The Bidens are following close behind, the Vice President and Dr. Biden, and at least one of their grandchildren, two of their grandchildren are coming, the Bidens' grandchildren as well. As we mentioned a moment ago, extremely rare. This is an extremely rare moment. A President of the United States meeting a foreign leader at the airport. It does not happen, and apparently hasn't happened at any point in the Obama administration. Mr. Obama first met the Pope about a year ago at the Vatican and is about to see him for the second time. Let's listen in for a moment and take in the sights and sounds of the crowd of about 1,000 people invited to attend. president taking his first step in his life onto the soil of the United States. The crowd chanting Francisco, Pope being introduced to the president's daughters. The president's mother-in-law. And the vice president, of course. We should note that Vice President Biden is the first Catholic vice president of the United States. That is Ambassador Hackett. He just saw, that is the United States ambassador to the Holy See. Holy See being Latin for holy seat. And now the Pope greeting members of the aristocracy of the Catholic Church of America, if you will. Pope has quite a few days coming up in the United States. He will be speaking to a joint meeting of Congress. He will also be in New York later in the week speaking to the United Nations General Assembly. So you don't get bigger crowds than that. Bill Plant is at the White House, has a number of details for us on what the Pope will be doing across the next 48 hours in Washington. Bill?
Well, Scott, the Pope tonight will go to his ambassadorial residence, if you will, the Nunciature, as Chip pointed out, to rest. But the big welcome is tomorrow morning on the White House South grounds. There are going to be 15 to 20,000 people at the welcoming ceremony. And the ceremony, Scott, is the same as for other heads of state, because the Pope, in addition to being the head of the church, is the head of the Vatican State. So he receives a head of state welcome, but not quite with full military honors. The military is there, but he doesn't inspect them. They simply march. They said they present the fife and drum corps, which is always presented, but the Pope and the President remain in place before the military leaves. So there'll be speeches tomorrow morning, and then the Pope will leave the White House and he'll process down one street and then around on the National Mall and up another, so that thousands of people will be able to see him. He'll be in his Pope-mobile, open on the sides, and be able to reach out and touch people as he is often wont to do. And so from there, he will go on to a meeting with bishops. So it'll be a very busy morning. Scott?
Senior White House correspondent Bill Plant. We should mention, by the way, we're not expecting any remarks here at Joint Base Andrews, either from the President or the Pope. Pope has had a long couple of days, and once he leaves Andrews after greeting everyone, he's going to be heading into Washington, and he will be resting for the rest of the day and the rest of the evening before the rest of his busy schedule. Alan Pizzi has just come off the plane behind the Pope. And Alan, what are you seeing?
Well, Scott, what I'm seeing is what you're seeing, but I'm seeing something that you're not, in that I've covered a couple of dozen of these arrivals of the Pope in countries, and this is completely different in that there are more press and there are fewer people than generally show up in free countries, at least. In some of the more restricted ones, there are less people. But what's interesting to me most of all is what you mentioned, that there's no welcoming speech. Invariably, when we get off the papal plane, there's a lectern, a microphone, a podium, sometimes a covered area, and the Pope has to make a speech, and the head of state makes a speech. And interestingly, when Raul Castro met the Pope when he arrived on Saturday in Havana, he made a very long speech, much longer than the Pope's. And in that speech, he basically tried to equate the ideals of the revolution, of the Cuban Revolution, with the ideals of Christianity, and kind of gaining a little credence, if you will, from the Pope, because the Cubans are kind of cooperating with the church because they need the church for a number of reasons, not least of them being that the church helps them put in changes so they can slide off under the guise of the church doing it instead of them knuckling under. So it's a little different than the other receptions, and I must say it's a little more orderly than some of the ones I've seen, Scott.
And Monsignor Anthony Figueiredo, as we watch the Pope and the President head toward the VIP terminal at Andrews, what are some of the subjects you think will come up in the Pope's remarks to the joint meeting of Congress?
his first mission, Scott, is obviously to proclaim the kingdom of God, but we need to remember that that kingdom means charity. The essence of his talk is love, really to love others, not on the basis of merit, but on the basis of need. So he's really going to be asking Congress to have those eyes for the poor, the defenseless, immigrants, the homeless, those who have no one to care for them. He's going to be challenging us to look out for them. I believe also he's going to be talking about issues concerning the environment. He's often talked about a culture of waste, which is much wider than even the culture of death that St. John Paul II talked about. He doesn't want us to waste anything, but he wants us to share with others. It's going to begin by a personal testimony. We're going to see him reaching out to people. This is a no-frills Pope. This is a Pope who wants to be accessible to all. You know, he's 78 years old, Scott. And in this year, he's visited, since his papacy, 15 different countries. He's going to be going to Africa in November. Next year, he already has 8 other countries planned. And he's going to be challenging us to do the same. I think he's also going to be touching to Congress on the issue of authority and power. This is a man who believes that authority, unbridled authority, corrupts. And he's going to be saying to those in Congress, get out of here, be with the poor, be with the suffering, know their needs and answer them. Incidentally, Scott, he's going to be saying exactly the same to bishops and priests. Don't stay in your rectories, but go to the peripheries of society. He's done that. It's amazing. In St. Peter's Square, when I go there, you know, he's built showers for the poor. He's built showers for the homeless. You know, some popes are known for building great basilicas, St. Peter's, the Sistine Chapel. What will mark this papacy is his particular love for the poor. You know, the other day, he just walked into an optician. He wants to be a normal pope. He wants to be a no-frills pope, and he wants each one of us to be the same. That's how we get in touch with other people.
He needed a new pair of glasses. I was in Rome at the time, and he just went to the local optician and walked in the door just like anybody else and told them, just replace the lenses. I don't want to go to the expense of new frames. A remarkable man with a remarkable touch at the Vatican, which we have not seen exactly in this way for quite some time. Chip Reed is on the receiving end, if you will, of the Pope. He's there at the residence where the Pope will be staying tonight. Chip?
Well, Scott, I'm going to reverse roles here. I actually have a question for you. You can see the children behind me, and we saw the Pope at Joint Base Andrews and how he reacts to children there. I think you're going to see even more here because there are about 200 of them here. But Scott, in Rome, you saw, in Vatican City, you saw what the Pope is like with children. Tell us about that, if you would.
Well, we had an opportunity to visit with the Pope at the Vatican's invitation at the Pope's General Assembly, which they have every Wednesday. 20, 30, 40,000 people come to see the Pope in the General Assembly. And you could tell, Chip, he had a special affection for the children in the group. He would be driving through in the Pope Mobile, and we're told he has a way of banging on the Pope Mobile to tell the driver to stop. And he gets off the Pope Mobile and greets children, greets the handicapped in particular, people that he sees in the crowd who he believes need a special blessing. And the Pope has also pulls out all the brides and grooms that have come for a blessing at the general audience, arrays them on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica, and really has a great time greeting all of those young Catholic families and posing for selfies. He's selfless in the age of the selfie as he goes through all of those people. And his father, Figueiredo, was saying the Pope is 78 years old, and he's greeting 40,000 people every Wednesday at the Vatican, and yet he goes through the entire process, hours, and seems to be invigorated by that. A remarkable man for a remarkable time.
He is that, Scott. By the way, I talked to some of these children about how excited. I asked them how excited they are. They could barely make a comprehensible sentence. I got words like awesome and cool and wow, but they're so distracted and so eager to see him that it was hard for them to really put their thoughts together. By the way, Scott, one other thing about the Apostolic Nunciature. We all know that Pope Francis is a man of very simple tastes, a very modest man. We are right in the heart of Embassy Row here. It is a very glitzy area, really, lots of big mansions. And this is a very elegant building, but I am told that although the first floor of this building is very elegantly furnished, the farther up you go, the more modest it is, and that may be something that Pope Francis will appreciate.
And to translate the Latin, the building you're standing in front of is essentially the residence of the Vatican's ambassador to the United
That's right.
States. Bill Plant, you're at the White House. A big day coming up as the Pope is planning an address to a joint meeting of Congress. He's had a lot of controversial things to say in the past many weeks, including admonitions against climate change caused by human beings and that sort of thing. What are you expecting in terms of the political climate there as he speaks to Congress?
Well, Scott, depending which side of the aisle you're on, you're going to hear what you like and you're going to hear what you don't like. If you're a Democrat, you're going to hear the admonitions for climate change and equal treatment for the poor and income equality as endorsements of your belief. If you are a Republican, you may not like all of those things, but you will like his opposition to abortion and same-sex marriage, although he's less likely to stress these things. As you've heard a couple of times, he doesn't stress the rules, he doesn't stress the doctrine, he stresses pastoral care. And I think that when he speaks, he's going to talk about both of these areas on both sides of the spectrum as it is seen here, but to him it's all common ground. Now, I think, Scott, that you will hear different accounts of what he said to the president from the White House and the Vatican. From the White House, you're likely to hear, as was the case when they met back in March of 2014, you're likely to hear about their common ground on fighting inequality, about their common ground on global warming. And from the Holy See, you're likely to hear that they discussed such things as the sanctity of life, conscientious objection, which in that case referred to the objection of the Catholic bishops to the Affordable Care Act providing mandatory contraception coverage. So it'll be in the eye of the beholder, but as far as the Pope goes, it's likely to be, in his view, all the same.
And we're just waiting now to see the Pope leaving the VIP terminal there at Joint Base Andrews. He's inside meeting with the president and a large number of people, dignitaries, who have come to greet him at the airport. We had and here he comes now, being escorted out by the president. This is a live picture again. And the Pope coming out, he's going to be heading to the vehicles that will take him to the ambassador's residence, where he will be staying overnight right across the street from the residence of the Vice President of the United States. As we mentioned before, the first Catholic Vice President of the United States. About 1,000 people were invited to come out to Andrews today to greet the Pope, and you can hear them chanting out there. Pope waving at the grandstand. The sounds of the honor guard as he approaches. As we mentioned, this is Francis's first trip to the United States in his life. It is going to be interesting to see what he makes of us. We had an opportunity to speak with him at the Vatican recently, and we asked him, what's your goal for your trip to America? And he raised his hands up and he said to meet the people, just to meet them. And he is certainly going to have a great opportunity to do that over the next several days. That was the Vatican a little over a week ago. when we had an opportunity. He was keeping his cards close to the vest. We asked him if he was going to talk about the dispossessed or immigration when he spoke to the joint meeting of Congress. And he smiled broadly and lifted his hands again and said, "I will speak to whatever the Holy Spirit guides me to speak to." And so we are going to have to wait until that meeting to hear what is on the mind of Francis. But here he is getting into, mind you, a very modest car, a small Fiat, not a big limousine, not anything any other head of state would be getting into. But this is something that he insists upon everywhere he goes and at the Vatican. He got rid of the Vatican limousine and rides around in a blue Ford Focus. Because he believes that the Pope should set the example of humility and living a modest life. The Pope speaks a number of languages, but English is not his strongest. We're told that he has been studying and has been practicing, and that we will hear him deliver remarks in English while he's in the United States. The Pope has now received about as warm a welcome as any head of state has ever received coming into the United States. So unusual in Washington to see a head of state driving away in such a modest little car. The ring of the fisherman on the Pope's outstretched hand, the symbol of the papacy. Each ring destroyed once the Pope perishes and a new ring created. Father Figueredo, you were with us a couple of years ago when we were at the Vatican watching this man that no one saw coming walk out onto the balcony as the new Pope of the worldwide Catholic Church. What has he changed in this short period of time?
He himself has said that St. Francis changed the world. And I think he's changed, first of all, the personal touch. He's encouraged us, challenged us to see the goodness in every single person. I think that's absolutely key. He's really changed the way we approach life. Look at that. Just look at that. Have we ever seen a head of state go in this little Fiat? But that's exactly what he wants. And that's who he really is. He's an authentic man. And that really calls me, calls myself to be simple in the same way. Incidentally, Scott, I was at the Apostolic Nunciature last Friday, and I met the family who's going to be cooking for him. And they told me that he's going to be having rice and boiled vegetables. That's what he's asked for, something very, very simple. I think it's simple, but I think it's also got to do with his busy schedule, his own sciatica. But listen, everyone else around him is going to have luscious banquets, good food, and he's going to eat simply, he's going to act simply. Excuse the pun, but I think we're going to be in for a ride these next days. We are going to see him break protocol. We're going to see him leave his own speeches, and we're going to see him, as you yourself said, want to be with the people, wanting to be with children, especially the weakest members of society. That is what he is changing. He's bringing, I believe, Jesus into the world, charity into the world, and it's changing everyone. Everyone I meet, Scott, it's really interesting going to restaurants. The other day I was riding back from Washington on the train, and everyone in that carriage was talking about the Pope. And they weren't talking in a negative way, as we're so often used to, but they were excited. They were invigorated by what they wanted to see in this Pope. I just talked to someone a few minutes ago and they said, I want to be in the street. I want to see this Holy Father. Why? Because he's giving a personal testimony of closeness, a common touch, the no-frills Pope that consoles us, that encourages particularly the weakest members of society.
And the end of the welcome, the President going back into the VIP lounge at Andrews Air Force Base. We just saw the Pope drive away in that little black Fiat with the license plate SCV1, which is Latin for Vatican City State number 1, and completely surrounded by all of the protocol and security that he deeply loathes. And he would much have preferred going on his way in the little black Fiat with no fuss around him at all. So, Pope Francis has arrived in the United States. It is his first trip to the United States in his life, beginning a very busy few days in which he will be in Washington. He will be greeted at the White House first thing in the morning with a full state honors greeting. He will be speaking to a joint meeting of Congress. Later, he'll go on to New York City to speak to the UN General Assembly, and then finally he'll be off to Philadelphia over the weekend to talk to the World Family Conference there and have a massive outdoor mass. We will have continuing coverage of the Pope's visit on our 24-hour digital news network, CBSN. It's available on all devices at cbsnews.com. There'll be more about all of this as well on your local news on this CBS station. And of course, right here on the CBS Evening News, we'll have a complete wrap-up on Pope Francis's historic visit to the United States. Until then, I'm Scott Pelley, CBS News in New York.
For news 24 hours a day, go to cbsnews.com.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley reporting tonight from Washington.
We are across from the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, where Pope Francis has just celebrated an outdoor mass for 25,000. He has come to tend to the hearts and souls of millions of Catholics, including this young girl who touched the Pope's heart. On his first full day here, Francis met controversy head-on, from climate change to sex abuse by priests. He raised immigration in his very first sentence, wiping away the borders of the hemisphere. He said he came to the United States in the name of all Americans. Nora O'Donnell begins our coverage.
Tens of thousands gathered along Constitution Avenue to catch a glimpse of Francis, the People's Pope, who stopped along the way to embrace small children and bask in the glow of his first American audience. He began his day greeting school kids gathered outside of his sleeping quarters, taking time for handshakes and hugs. Then His Holiness, in all his humility, drove in a small Fiat 500 to an elaborate White House ceremony, where he was welcomed by the President, Mrs. Obama, and 11,000 ticketed guests.
I should explain that our backyard is not typically this crowded. In your humility, we see a living example of Jesus' teachings, a leader whose moral authority comes not just through words, but also through deeds.
The Holy Father drew upon that moral authority to address issues more political than pastoral, like immigration and climate change.
As the son of an immigrant family, I'm happy to be a guest in this country, which was largely built by such families. Mr. President, I find it encouraging that you are proposing an initiative for reducing air pollution.
It was then on to the Cathedral of St. Matthew the Apostle for a prayer service with 280 bishops.
Guarire le vittime
And for the first time in his visit, he spoke about one of Catholicism's darkest chapters, the sexual abuse of children by American clergy. He never addressed the victims directly, but vowed, quote, to ensure that such crimes will never be repeated.
And Scott, it was extraordinary to hear the Pope today here at the White House call on the world to address climate change. And in doing so, he invoked Martin Luther King, and he referenced his I Have a Dream speech. He used the same phrase as King, quote unquote, defaulting on a promissory note and saying that now is the time to honor it. And Scott, we understand His Holiness will again wade into controversial policy issues when he addresses a joint meeting of Congress tomorrow, the first Pope in history to do so.
And Nora, you'll be right here covering that historic event in Washington on CBS this morning. Thanks very much for your coverage tonight. You know, when the Pope speaks of being an immigrant, he is referring to his birth in Argentina to Italian parents. The first Pope in 1,000 years not born in Europe. Maybe that's what was behind the most remarkable moment of this day, when a 5-year-old girl immigrated beyond the security line. Sophie Cruz squeezed through security barriers to deliver a message to the Pope. A child of illegal immigrants, she has put a new face on the debate over immigration reform. Sophie traveled to Washington from Los Angeles with her father.
And what did you do?
I ran to the Pope.
And what did you give him?
The letter and a shirt like these.
In her letter, she asks Francis to help all immigrant children. The Secret Service held Sophie back, but when the Pope saw her, he waved her over and blessed her. It reminded us of a moment last year when another girl from Los Angeles greeted the Pope in St. Peter's Square in Rome. 11-year-old Jersey Vargas traveled there to help her father, Mario, who was in the custody of U.S. immigration. She called it her miracle moment.
I told them, please help my family because my dad was going to be deported, and it's unfair that millions of children are also suffering in my same situation. And he blessed me, he kissed me on my forehead, and he told me that he was going to talk with the president.
Not long after, her father was released, and his case is now under review. Jersey was in Washington today hoping for another meeting with the Pope.
I'm passionate because about what happened to my dad. I also want to make a difference in the world because I won't stop fighting until the immigration reform happens.
And Jan Crawford has been speaking to many of the folks who have spent hours today waiting for just a few seconds that they will remember the rest of their lives.
For the thousands who line the streets just hoping for a glimpse, it was a moment.
It was awesome, really awesome. My heart is still beating from seeing the Pope.
They came from everywhere.
Puerto Rico, from Puerto Rico.
And you're Memphis, Tennessee. Anybody else from?
Nashville.
Pittsburgh, Nashville.
Mexico.
Many waiting for hours.
So you came in late last night?
Late last night.
And you camped out?
Straight here, midnight, camped out, I guess.
Milton Leone and his family got in line at 1 in the morning for a spot in the front.
I saw him very well. I was yelling, Francesco, Francesco.
His wife, Janeth, cried.
My whole body was shaking, and my heart was just going up.
For all the security and pageantry, it was a day when Francis touched the people. 17-year-old Christian Escherich waited in line hoping to share his family's Christmas card with a picture of his older brother Andrew. He passed away 5 months ago. Pope Francis gave his blessing.
He just gave that almost fatherly look that he really cared about each and every individual. Possibly the best moment of my life.
Making his way through the crowds, the Pope's focus was the children. Even the youngest connected with the 78-year-old.
I got a selfie.
And, when given a chance, had to take a selfie.
Your finger got in the way.
Yeah. Or, in the case of 11-year-old Walter Cunningham, a shaky video on his cell phone he can't wait to share with friends.
I'm going to tell them that I saw the Pope and they should have been here.
Now, the thing that really characterizes this day is joy. And Scott, every time the Pope comes and goes from here at the Vatican Embassy, he greets another group of ecstatic school children.
Jan Crawford, thank you very much, Jan. The Holy Father made another statement about immigrants right here simply by celebrating his first Mass in the United States in Spanish. Here's Chip Reed.
Pope Francis couldn't resist the opportunity of another joyous open-air ride in the Pope-mobile, as an adoring crowd of 25,000 welcomed him to Washington's Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. As he walked through the basilica, the faithful who filled the aisles strained to see or even touch him, before he made his way to a small chapel where he prayed in private. Then, on the steps of the largest Catholic church in North America, at an elaborate temporary outdoor altar, the Pope celebrated Mass in Spanish, his native language. Unlike earlier speeches, he avoided controversial issues like immigration and religious freedom and focused on what it means to be a Catholic.
A todos.
Go out to tell the good news fearlessly, he said, without prejudice, without superiority, without condescension, to all those who have lost the joy of living. The crowd was full of young people. Many told us they've never felt so good about being Catholic and praised Pope Francis for his non-judgmental style.
Juniperum serra.
A highlight of the more than 2-hour ceremony was the Pope's elevation of Junipero Serra to sainthood. Serra was a missionary in the 1700s in what is now California. It's the first ever canonization Mass on U.S. soil. Francis quoted Serra's motto, "Keep moving forward."
Siempre adelante.
For him, the Pope said, this was the way to continue experiencing the joy of the gospel.
So not only did the Pope speak in Spanish, but Junipero Serra, the new saint, is from Spain, and a large portion of this audience was from Hispanic parishes. In other words, Scott, this was a very big day for Hispanics in the Catholic Church.
Chip, thank you very much. That canonization of Junipero Serra is controversial, and Carter Evans found out why.
At Mission San Juan Capistrano, Junipero Serra was honored. But 430 miles north at Mission Dolores, protesters denounced him.
People look at this building right here and they see history. What do you see?
I see pain for my ancestors. I see a change in our entire world.
For Karina Gould, this is sacred ground. Thousands of her ancestors from the Ohlone tribe are buried here in unmarked graves. For her, Serra left a brutal legacy in his drive to baptize and assimilate California Indians, often beating and imprisoning them in the missions.
Once you were baptized and you became Catholic, then you lost your freedom altogether. You become the property of the church.
But Serra doesn't see that. He sees Indians as naked, as hungry, as hungering literally for food and for salvation in Christ.
History professor Stephen Hackle says for many Hispanics in California, Serra is seen as a founding father. His presence is everywhere.
I think what the Pope is really trying to do is open up an understanding of our American origins. It wasn't just Anglo-American Protestants, but Catholic priests throughout the continent.
Father Serra was a Spaniard. He was European, therefore he was white. He was not Hispanic.
And Gould believes by making Serra a saint, the church is ignoring an ugly chapter in California history.
The mission system that he brought with him created total destruction of who we were as a people and our culture.
Serra is the first Spanish-speaking saint from the U.S., and Pope Francis even fast-tracked his canonization. Scott, he waived the usual rule requiring 2 miracles for sainthood and accepted just 1.
Carter Evans, thanks.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
Late today, Pope Francis landed in New York City, the second stop on his 3-city visit to the United States. The Pope was greeted by a crowd at John F. Kennedy Airport. As you see him walking out there, this was just a little over an hour ago. He was flown by helicopter to downtown Manhattan, and we have a live picture now of Fifth Avenue in New York. That's the Pope in his little Fiat. He is heading over to the Pope Mobile, and he will be getting on board the Pope Mobile and greeting the people of New York City as he drives along Fifth Avenue to St. Patrick's Cathedral. The Pope flew in from Washington earlier, where he made a historic address to Congress. After the speech, the Pope greeted thousands outside the U.S. Capitol, and he blessed an infant in Statuary Hall. He visited the needy in Washington and stopped to pose selflessly for a selfie. This evening, the humble Pope is greeting the crowds that you just saw there on Fifth Avenue, on the most expensive street in the world. He is en route to a prayer service at New York's St. Patrick's Cathedral, the 135-year-old Gothic structure that has been renovated over the last 3 years just for the Pope's visit today. And as we watch the Pope getting on board the Pope Mobile, we'll go to Chip Reed at St. Patrick's. Chip?
Well, Scott, he's 4 blocks north of here. We're at 51st Street on Fifth Avenue. He's at 55th. He ought to be here in a matter of minutes to St. Patrick's Cathedral. There are thousands of people lining the streets, and as you can imagine, they are just beside themselves with anticipation. Some of these people went to extraordinary lengths to be here. For example, Sergio Campos, we talked to, traveled from Venezuela with his mother and has been waiting on the street for 7 hours just to get a glimpse of the Pope.
Well, I'm excited because I'm seeing the biggest personality of Catholic Church. I mean, this is our hero. It's something that moves you, you know? It's something that you need to see.
The Jones-Ibrahim family came all the way from Massachusetts and Washington, D.C. to see one of their heroes.
We are supporting him because of his stance about inequality and his support of immigrants, immigration, protection of the planet.
It's historic. We're a part of history.
In an entirely different category of person, we spotted Donald Trump on a balcony overlooking Fifth Avenue. And by the way, Scott, St. Patrick's Cathedral behind me, you can see behind me a large group of invited guests back there. There are about 500 people. Half of them are people who worked on the cathedral renovation that was finished recently. The other half are area Catholic high school students, and most of those got to be here because they performed extraordinary service for the community and for the church.
Chip Reed, just up Fifth Avenue from the Pope right now at St. Patrick's Cathedral. This is a live picture. You're watching now the Pope just on board the Pope Mobile on Fifth Avenue. The humble Pope on the most expensive street in the world. Thousands of people lining the street as they often do. This is New York's favorite thoroughfare for parades. And pretty soon the Pope will be rolling down the street just a few blocks to get to the prayer service at St. Patrick's. This morning, Francis became the first pope in history to address a joint meeting of Congress. He scolded the lawmakers, and they loved it. Here's Nancy Cordes.
Mr. Speaker, the Pope of the Holy See.
The first pope ever to set foot in the Capitol was greeted with rapturous applause. Like any good guest, he started out with a compliment, saying he was glad to be
in the land of the free, at the home of the brave.
And then the Argentinian-born pope waded into many of the issues that divide these lawmakers, urging them to reject what he called a mindset of hostility when it comes to illegal immigrants and refugees.
We, the people of this continent, are not fearful of foreigners, because most of us were once foreigners.
He also called on Congress to combat climate change, an issue dear to many Democrats.
I'm convinced that we can make a difference. I'm sure.
On social issues, the Pope said every life is sacred, a reference to both abortion and to the death penalty, which he argued should be abolished.
I am convinced that this way is the best.
And he seemed to be referring to same-sex marriage when he said this.
Fundamental relations are being called into question, as is the very basis of marriage and the family.
House Speaker John Boehner, who is Catholic, invited the Pope last spring. As he waited to greet him this morning, Boehner worked hard to hold back tears and succumbed to them repeatedly thereafter, as he and the nation's first Catholic vice president flanked the Pope on the dais. Later, on the Speaker's balcony, Boehner was overcome again, as the Pope blessed a crowd of thousands gathered on the National Mall and asked them to pray for him.
Thank you very much, and God bless America.
One word the Pope used repeatedly today was dialogue. He said good leaders promote peace by engaging in it. And several lawmakers told us that's the message that will stick with them, since they work in a place, Scott, where people tend to talk past each other.
Nancy Cordes at the Capitol. Thank you, Nancy. Let's go back to that live picture of the Pope. This is the Pope coming up Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. Live picture. Thousands of people lining the streets to greet the Pope. His first trip in his life to the United States. The first Pope, of course, from the Americas. Very excited crowds. There he is. He's headed to St. Patrick's Cathedral in the 50s, between 50th and 51st on Fifth Avenue. And he's going to make that a slow trip as he greets the faithful. Pope Francis has said that the most beautiful expressions of joy are in poor people with little to hold on to. Well, he sought that joy today at Catholic Charities in Washington. And here's Jan Crawford.
He's been called the Pope of the Poor. He spoke directly to those who have gone without.
In
prayer, there is no first or second class. There is brotherhood.
He shared his message of hope with people who work directly with the poor and some of the needy they serve, like Lanita King, a former drug addict who once was homeless.
It felt like energy just went through my hand as he touched it and grabbed it.
King was one of many who connected with the Pope and felt blessed.
He's delivering the message that God is here for us. God is here for us.
Concern for the poor is a foundation of Catholicism, and Francis has pledged to restore the dignity of those in need. The Vatican now hands out sleeping bags to homeless around St. Peter's Square and even built them showers. The homeless see Francis as a protector.
He's here for homelessness and to make our world better.
And in Washington, after saying a prayer over lunch, the Pope also made their world brighter.
This is a good thing, like Jesus' Last Supper. So we're supping with the Pope.
Cartrice Hainsworth gets help with her rent from Catholic Charities and got a selfie with the Pope. She hopes his message resonates.
I hope and pray that our government officials take something from that and really work for the people.
Now, if there were any question about the Pope's priorities, Scott, he passed up a lunch in his honor on Capitol Hill to come here today and spend time with the less fortunate.
Jan Crawford reporting in Washington. Jan, thanks very much. We want to go back to Chip Reed now at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, where the Pope is just arriving. Chip?
Yes, Scott, I think you can probably see the Pope there. They're just the roar from the crowd as he's being welcomed by Governor Cuomo, Mayor de Blasio, Senator Chuck Schumer, and in the red cap, that is Cardinal Dolan, the Archbishop of New York. He has been there for a few minutes now. I guess they all want to have their moment with the Pope. He's then going to walk into St. Patrick's Cathedral. They just in the last few minutes opened those big brass doors that weigh 9,200 pounds apiece. He's waving to the crowd now, and he's getting the response that he always gets. They go crazy. And when he goes into the cathedral, there is a whole specific series of things he has to do. He is going to kiss a crucifix and a number of other things that are all choreographed ahead of time. And then he is going to participate and help conduct evening prayer, otherwise known as a Vespers service. And here he goes. He's heading now up the steps. Scott?
Chip, thanks very much. The bells of St. Patrick's pealing over Manhattan. And we will be back with more right after this. The Pope this evening in St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. Children especially are drawn to Francis, and he will be visiting some school kids in Harlem tomorrow. Elaine Quijano is there.
Students at Our Lady Queen of Angels have prepared for the Pope's visit.
I feel really excited because a lot of kids never got to meet the Pope.
Third grader Allison Reyes is one of 6 students from the school chosen by lottery to meet with him.
The Pope really likes taking care of the poor and likes taking care of the environment, and he really loves kids.
8-year-old Pedro Hernandez can't wait to show the Pope his project on the environment.
In this school, we're recycling and we aren't wasting energy because we're opening the windows. So that we don't have to use the fan.
What I have here...
Third grader Aaron Diaz wonders about the serious lung infection the Pope had decades ago.
I want to ask him how could he still survive after he has only 1 lung and a half.
Fourth graders Nicholas Marinero and Gumbu Kamwa have modern-day concerns.
Since, I know he took one time a selfie, if he knew if it was actually called a selfie or he just thought it was a photo.
Do you think he has a cell phone?
I don't know.
If he does, he probably has those flip ones because he probably doesn't want to spend too much money on getting unnecessary stuff.
The Pope's humility has left an impression on these kids.
I think they offered him a big home in Rome, and he didn't want to take it, and he took a little house instead. He thought it was too fancy.
Aaron Diaz has a special request from his dad.
He wants me to ask him to pray for the Mets so that way they can get into the playoffs.
Are you going to do that?
I guess so.
In the middle of a highly choreographed visit, the Pope is making time for these children and their unscripted moments. Elaine Quijano, CBS News, New York.
And we'll be right back. Let's watch Pope Francis live right now leading a prayer service in St. Patrick's Cathedral, the seat of the New York Archdiocese. Francis is the 4th Pope to visit New York. Tomorrow he will address the United Nations and visit the 9/11 Memorial. That's a CBS Evening News for tonight. For all of us at CBS News, good night.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
This is our Western edition. As parades go, it was St. Patrick's Day and Thanksgiving all rolled into one. Thousands lined the sidewalks of New York today for a chance to see Pope Francis as he rolled by in the Pope-mobile. But no one wanted to see him more than the parents of this ailing child. They were moved to tears when the Pope gave the child his blessing. They were among nearly 20,000 people at Madison Square Garden, where the Pope was celebrating Mass tonight. One of the highlights of the Pope's visit to New York today was his visit to the National September 11th Memorial. He placed a flower at one of the 2 waterfalls where the names of the nearly 3,000 victims are etched in bronze. Right now, the Pope is celebrating Mass at Madison Square Garden, and Chip Reed is there. Chip?
That's right, Scott. He is inside the arena, and the Mass has begun. Some of those 20,000 faithful inside waited almost all day in line just to get in. This is the last event in what has been a very long day for Pope Francis. Some of the day's most powerful moments came during the Pope's visit to the 9/11 Memorial, where he prayed at the reflecting pools where the World Trade Center towers once stood. He met with families of those who lost their lives that day more than 14 years ago. One woman showed Francis a memento, which he then blessed. Inside the museum, Francis solemnly viewed artifacts from Ground Zero, including a Bible found in the debris, opened to the passage, "An eye for an eye."
Bring your peace.
The Pope also spoke at an interfaith service with leaders of other religions, including an imam and a rabbi, to remember the victims and honor the survivors. The family members show us their face of pain, he said, pain that leaves us speechless, but that screams to heaven. Following his remarks, children with the Young People's Chorus of New York City sang a well-known song of hope. At Madison Square Garden, the Pope had his own message of hope for people living in big cities like New York. A hope which makes us see, he said, even in the midst of smog, the presence of God. Saturday morning, the Pope will fly to Philadelphia, where on Sunday he will celebrate a Mass that's expected to attract more than 1 million people. Scott?
Chip Reed reporting tonight. Chip, thank you. The Pope follows the words of Jesus, "Let the little children come to me." In East Harlem, a Catholic school there, kids were bursting with pride as they told Francis what they were studying, and they taught him how to use a smart board, or at least they tried to. They sang to Francis as well, to his absolute delight. Then it was time for a one-man parade, and Elaine Quijano has that. Elaine?
Well, Scott, well before dawn, hundreds of people began lining up just to see the Pope. And when he finally arrived here in Central Park, that moment for them was electric. Central Park roared as an estimated 80,000 people cheered Pope Francis. People of all ages and backgrounds clamored to get a glimpse of the people's Pope, including Mustafa El-Sehemi.
I could feel him, that he's going to do something for the whole world.
Most in the crowd were Catholic, but El-Sehemi is a devout Muslim who came to today's event because of the Pope's mission to help the poor. He was penniless himself when he came to this country 36 years ago.
He's just a great Pope. It makes me cry sometimes when I see him because he's just kind of the man that I admire the most.
He and his wife Olga, who is Catholic, were deeply moved by the Pope's visit.
When he speaks, we don't feel that he speaks only to one faith. We feel that he speaks to all of us.
Scott, afterwards we spoke with many people who said they understand fully now why Pope Francis is considered the people's Pope.
Elaine, thanks. The Pope began his day admonishing world leaders at the year's largest gathering of heads of state, the UN General Assembly, and Margaret Brennan was there.
After a warm greeting from world leaders and dignitaries, Pope Francis scolded them for an explosion of global violence, particularly in the Middle East and Africa, conflicts he has likened to World War III. Speaking in his native Spanish, Francis said the resulting flood of refugees was a, quote, grave summons for world leaders to examine their consciences. Human beings, he said, are easily discarded when our only response is to draw up lists of problems, strategies, and disagreements. Francis also called for less talk, more action to protect the environment, saying humanity's, quote, selfish and boundless thirst for money is destroying the earth.
The Pope used this strong language to try to influence global leaders. Scott, a record number of them are expected to gather here at the UN in the next few days.
Margaret Brennan reporting tonight. Margaret, thank you.
This is the CBS Evening News.
Good evening. I'm Jim Axelrod, and this is a Western edition of the broadcast. Pope Francis is wrapping up his 3-city tour of the United States in the cradle of American democracy, Philadelphia. Today, he delivered a speech from Independence Hall, the building where both the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution were signed. The Holy Father spoke from the same simple wooden lectern that President Abraham Lincoln used when he delivered the Gettysburg Address nearly 152 years ago. Pope Francis addressed 2 issues that have been widely discussed by Americans in recent months: religious liberty and immigration. Alan Pizzi is traveling with the Pope.
At his request, Pope Francis took time out to be a tourist today, doing a pass by the Statue of Liberty on his way to take the plane to Philadelphia. The final 2 days of the Pope's visit are a celebration of families, the official reason for the trip dubbed Pilgrimage of Mercy. Francis underlined that by getting out of his Fiat to embrace 10-year-old Michael Keating. By definition, this stop is about meeting the people, not the politicians, a challenge for the security operation nonetheless. The first event here was Mass with church officials and workers, and everyone wanted contact. Bolstering the church in the U.S. city hardest hit by the sex abuse scandal is as integral a part of the visit as underscoring commitment to the traditional family in the Catholic sense, meaning heterosexual. The traditional Mass was a far cry from the one Friday night in Madison Square Garden. Threaded through by a voice that truly could be called heavenly, the message there was tailored for a metropolis. Francis called for compassion towards people who stand at the edges in deafening anonymity, foreigners, children without schooling, those deprived of medical insurance, the homeless, the forgotten elderly. He may be getting a bit weary today, but this Pope never forgets his worldwide audience. Outside Independence Hall, which he described as the place where the freedoms that define this country were first proclaimed, Francis made a plea for religious freedom. It was imperative, he said, that followers of the various religions join their voices in calling for peace, tolerance, and respect for the dignity and rights of others.
Tomorrow, Pope Francis will visit a prison and is expected to meet with sex abuse victims, but that will be private. His last event, however, will be anything but that, a Mass that's predicted to draw more than 1 million people. Jim?
Alan Pizzi covering the Pope in Philadelphia. Alan, thank you. By the way, if tomorrow's Mass does draw more than 1 million people, that would make it the largest papal event in U.S. history, but not even close to the largest ever worldwide. That would be last January in the Philippines, where the Pope drew somewhere between 6 and 7 million people. The World Meeting of Families, the Catholic rally taking place this weekend in Philadelphia, was the original reason for the Pope's visit to the United States. Here's Jerika Duncan.
The 2015 World Meeting of Families lived up to its name. Where are you from?
Moline, Illinois.
How about you?
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
Dominican Republic.
Dominican Republic.
Peru.
Peru?
New York.
Peru.
Hundreds of thousands packed the Benjamin Franklin Parkway. 65-year-old Delfina Torres came by bus from Kansas City.
Took us 24 hours because our bus broke down.
And then what happened when you got here?
Every day, at least 18 hours walking, looking for everything.
100 faithful even camped out in a cemetery just to be here. Maria Cardenas is staying with her sister who lives in Philadelphia. She spent over $1,300 on her plane ticket.
As soon as she told me that the Pope was coming here, I came all the way from Caracas, Venezuela. He asked to pray for him, and now I asked him to pray for Venezuela.
The Solanos from Tucson, Arizona saved for several months.
We love him. He speaks our language and he's going to fight for us just like we're fighting for each other.
Sonia Solano says her family immigrated from Mexico. She's personally inspired by the Pope's calls to embrace the immigrant community. Sister Anna Nguyen from York, Pennsylvania has been a nun for 35 years.
It may not be customary for a nun to have a favorite pope, but is this your favorite pope?
He absolutely is my favorite.
More than 750,000 people are expected to attend tonight's festival, where Aretha Franklin will perform. Jim, she's expected to present the Pope with sermons from her father, who was a preacher.
That would be the Reverend C.L. Franklin. Jerika, thank you.
This is the CBS Evening News.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Glor, and this is a Western edition of the broadcast. Pope Francis wrapped up his first ever visit to the United States with what is believed to have been the largest Mass ever in this country, an estimated crowd of around 1 million people. The Pope rarely addresses the public in English, but did so this evening as he offered a final blessing. We start with Jerika Duncan in Philadelphia.
May God bless you all. God bless America.
Pope Francis left on a high note, but his last day here in the United States began with some of his strongest comments yet about church sex abuse.
Dios llora.
God weeps.
Speaking to 300 bishops this morning, the pontiff went off script for nearly 3 minutes and acknowledged that some clergy members caused, quote, grievous harm.
And I commit to a careful oversight to ensure that youth are protected and that all responsible will be held accountable.
Those remarks came after meeting privately with 5 sexual abuse victims inside St. Charles Borromeo Seminary. Barbara Blaine from Chicago is the president of the Survivors Network of those abused by priests.
What I'm looking for is the Pope and church officials to take action that will prevent some other child from having to have his or her innocence shattered. The Pope just isn't doing it.
At a news conference this afternoon, Vatican spokesperson Father Federico Lombardi talked about the overall success of the Pope's visit.
Pope Francis focused on the family here in Philadelphia, but was very careful not to specifically mention his view of the family, which starts, according to him, with one man and one woman. Why didn't he have more to say about that this weekend?
He has avoided, I think, particular polemics or discussion because he comes for a positive message.
The Pope concluded his trip with a mass for faithful families who say the sacrifices they made to be here were worth it. The 2-hour-long mass came to an end with a thunderous applause. Jeff, the Vatican announced the next World Meeting of Families will be in Dublin, Ireland in 2018.
Jarika, thank you very much. Before heading back home, Pope Francis had traveled more than 7,000 miles in 9 days. Impressive, but not quite as far as a family from his home country who made an epic road trip to see him. They left Argentina in a VW bus named Francesca. Kateri Walker, Noel Zembarain, and their 4 children set off from Buenos Aires for a 13,000-mile pilgrimage. Mom and Dad quit their jobs and used savings and donations to fund the trip through the Americas, crossing 12 borders and staying with dozens of host families. On the way, they saw the sights, even the White House. Francesca, the bus, had its share of breakdowns, but the family pressed on. And finally, in Philadelphia, their dream came true. All 6 were granted an audience with Pope Francis. The Pope asked, "Are you the family who traveled from Buenos Aires? You are crazy." There were hugs. Then he said, "I need your prayers." The Vatican spokesman, Father Lombardi, made a note of the visit.
The experience of this family has touched him very, very much.
The family is now trying to raise money for their return trip, the mode of transportation to be determined. Pope Francis has finished his first ever U.S. visit and is on his way back to the Vatican tonight. CBS News foreign correspondent Ellen Pizzi has been with the Pope, sometimes very close, the entire way all week. He filed this reporter's notebook.
From the moment Pope Francis took his first steps on this trip, there were events that stood out and at times bemused. Who else but Cuban President Raul Castro could make a welcoming speech that equated a socialist revolution with the ideals and aims of the Catholic Church? Ordinary Cubans, however, had only one thing on their minds: would the Pope's efforts mean an end to the U.S. trade embargo? His arrival in the U.S. was classic Francis, welcomed at the steps of the plane by the president and then climbing into a Fiat. What better way to show Americans that they were about to see and hear something exceptional? The rapturous reception when he hit the streets was familiar.
There it is. There's the Fiat. Right down there. Oh! Did you see him?
But this reporter wasn't prepared for the rapture of a fellow correspondent.
And I think he was waving directly at you.
Did you hear my excitement? I felt like a little girl again.
The commentary made it clear how privileged we who travel with the Pope actually are, to get to shake his hand,
Signor Pizzi,
look him in the eye, and feel the warmth that emanates from the man.
We are living at a critical moment of history.
Francis' speech at the White House was the first I'd ever heard him deliver in English. Unlike his homilies in Italian or Spanish, he barely deviated by a word. The deliberate delivery, diction, and emphasis drove home his message in a way no translation ever could.
God bless America.
And then there was the extraordinary security. Never was so much carbon emitted to protect a man so concerned about global warming, or, who in the words of his press spokesman, is happiest when there's no security at all. The classic moment was when this little girl breached the lines and Francis had her brought over for a blessing.
Do unto others as you will have them do unto you.
As for the Pope's breaches of the barriers of politics, you didn't have to be a policy wonk to figure out who stood where on the controversial points like climate change and immigration laws. But it was the enthusiasm of ordinary people which stood out above all. One was left with the overall impression that the reaction to Francis and his messages will linger, and the politicians ignore it at their peril. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, aboard the papal flight.
That is the CBS Evening News tonight. Later on CBS, the season premiere of 60 Minutes. And first thing tomorrow, CBS This Morning. We leave you tonight with pictures of Pope Francis as he departs from Philadelphia, ending his first ever visit to the U.S. I'm Jeff Glor, CBS News in New York. Good night.